Hey everyone, in this video we are going to examine a broad overview of how the United States was able to help defeat the Axis powers in Europe. So, let's dig in. Previously, the attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into World War II on the Allied side, providing a much-needed boost. Just 15 days after joining the war, President Franklin D. Roosevelt and Prime Minister of England, Winston Churchill, met to devise a strategy for the Allies, who were battered but still fighting. The two agreed upon three key strategies. The first was known as Europe First. The Allies considered Germany the most dangerous enemy. None felt Japan or Italy posed a serious long-term threat. Only Germany had the resources to simultaneously bomb Britain, fight the United States and British navies on the Atlantic, and invade the Soviet Union across a 12,000-mile front. As a result, all resources would go towards defeating Germany. Next, the Allies agreed they would demand an unconditional surrender from Germany, Italy, and Japan to ensure that Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo would not remain in power. And finally, Roosevelt and Churchill formed an alliance known as the Allied Powers with Joseph Stalin. Though they did not trust the Soviet Union's Stalin, they worked together to manage the powerful but problematic ally. The first issue that the Allies faced was delivering weapons, food, medical supplies, and troops to Europe to fuel the Allied war machine. German submarines, known as U-boats, had sunk over 3,500 merchant ships, killing tens of thousands of Allied sailors. U-boats up to this point were extremely effective because they struck when boats least expected and only surfaced at night. To counter this, the Allies used the convoy system, which involved cargo ships traveling in groups, escorted by destroyers and air force. Second, a new invention, radar, helped Allied vessels locate U-boats on the surface at night. And last, bombers and underwater depth charges allowed Allied forces to sink U-boats faster than Germany could manufacture them. As you can see in this image, American sailors watched as Allied bombers attacked a German U-boat. On the ground, Nazi troops fought numerous fronts. In particular, in the east, German troops in 1941 attempted to take over the Soviet Union by attacking key military cities. The vast terrain, Soviet resistance, and the frigid winter climate ultimately would stop the German advance. But in 1942, Hitler attempted to take over the oil-rich fields near the city of Stalingrad. The ensuing battle, known as the Battle of Stalingrad, lasted 5 months, with over 2 million people injured, wounded, or killed, and over 3,000 planes and 6,000 tanks destroyed. In 1943, German troops would eventually surrender to the Soviet army. The significance of the Battle of Stalingrad is that it was the first turning point of the war in Europe, ending any realistic plans Hitler had of dominating the entire continent. The Nazi army was forced to retreat westward back towards Germany, and instead it was the Soviet Union that was now on the offensive. Yet Axis troops still remained in key areas around Europe, namely North Africa, Italy, and France. The Allies focused on 3 major campaigns to crush the Axis powers, and up first was the North Africa front from 1942 to 1943. Now, North Africa was important to the Germans due to its rich oil fields and the Suez Canal. The Allies' goal was to prevent Germany from gaining access to these resources. The Allies landed in Morocco and Algeria in 1943, and the commander of the Allied invasion was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, known as Ike. Eisenhower was joined by the innovative tank commander George S. Patton. Patton was one of the most famous generals in U.S. history, and Patton was known for being a tough, intense, brash, and ruthless leader. His nickname was Old Blood and Guts. Together, Eisenhower and Patton went up against the Afrika Korps under General Erwin Rommel. Rommel's nickname was the Desert Fox because of his mastery of tank warfare. Fighting in North Africa, in fact, primarily used tank warfare, and although a brilliant tactician, Rommel was ultimately overwhelmed by American forces and faced a lack of supplies. The American army was able to force the Germans to retreat from the west as British troops pushed in from the east. Though Rommel would escape, in 1943, the remaining German and Italian forces in North Africa, which was some 240,000 troops, would surrender. The result of the North Africa campaign was a success for the Allies. Hitler's troops were now in retreat out of North Africa. The Allies now turned their attention to an invasion of Mussolini's fascist Italy, which would last from 1943 to 1945. The goal was to push through Italy towards Germany and end the rule of Benito Mussolini. So in 1943, British and American armies landed in Sicily and were commanded again by Dwight D. Eisenhower, with George Patton also leading significant American forces. Over a 38-day campaign, the Allies achieved important results. First, the Axis powers were forced to retreat to North Italy. This gave the Allies control of the all-important Sicily, and ultimately southern Italy. Next, the Italian people turned on Mussolini, and he was deposed as the leader of Italy. As such, on September 3, 1943, Italy would officially surrender to the Allies, and just 5 weeks later, they would declare war on Germany. While this meant that Mussolini was no longer in charge of Italy, unfortunately he escaped being captured and was given control of the Axis powers in northern Italy by Hitler. The Allies would ultimately not take control of the whole nation until 1945. An important component of the Allies' success was the use of air warfare. In Italy and also in Europe, an African-American squadron of pilots known as the Tuskegee Airmen played a key role. They escorted bombers and protected them from enemy fighter pilots. In more than 1,500 missions over enemy territory in Europe, the Tuskegee Airmen did not lose a single bomber. With Hitler and Mussolini now on the run, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met at the Tehran Conference in Iran to set up the next plan of attack. At that stage, Hitler was already surrounded on the east by the Soviet army and on the south by the American and British troops. The three agreed to an Allied invasion of northern France, which Hitler maintained control of. Invading France would surround Hitler on three sides. The invasion of northern France was known as Operation Overlord, and it lasted from June 6, 1944 to the end of the war. The invasion was meticulously planned by the Supreme Commander of Allied Forces, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Overlord involved over 3 million American, British, Canadian, and Polish troops, landing on a 50-mile stretch of beaches in Normandy. The fleet was the strongest ever assembled, comprising more than 4,400 ships and landing crafts. On June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, troops landed at 5 French beaches, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. At Omaha Beach, U.S. troops faced the toughest opposition. On the cliffs overlooking the beach, the Germans had dug trenches and built small concrete pillbox structures from which heavy artillery could be fired. When the first American soldiers arrived, they stepped out of their landing crafts into a rainstorm of German bullets. The results of the battle were staggering. Over 10,000 casualties occurred. Yet the Allies could now land tanks, men, and supplies in France that would eventually lead to an invasion of Germany. It was only a matter of time before Germany would be forced to surrender. The first step was for the Allies to liberate Paris, France, which they would do in August of 1944. By this time, Hitler was losing his grip on the war. He attempted one last-ditch effort to thwart the Allied powers. In December of 1944, as snow fell in the forests of Belgium, Hitler ordered a massive offensive. Known as the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans caught the Allies by surprise and created a bulge in the American line. Snowy, cloudy skies prevented the Allies from exploiting their air superiority, and Germany almost had a big victory. But at the Belgian town of Bastogne, American forces led by Eisenhower and Patton held despite frostbite and brutal German assaults. Then on December 23rd, the skies cleared and Allied bombers attacked German positions. The result of the battle crippled Germany by forcing it to use its reserve troops and supplies, and ultimately it shortened the time Hitler had left. By April of 1945, American and Soviet troops met outside Berlin, Germany. There, Hitler and the Nazis were captured. By the end of the month, Hitler and his closest allies would commit suicide.
This is London calling. Here is a news flash. The German radio has just announced that Hitler is dead.
On May 7th, Germany officially surrendered. Americans celebrated VE Day, also known as Victory in Europe Day. The war in Europe at long last was over, but would continue in the Pacific theater. Sadly, President Roosevelt did not see the momentous day. He had died a few weeks earlier, and it would be up to a new president, Harry S. Truman, to see the nation through to final victory.